Hi everyone, welcome to the very first episode of Plasma Conduit, Burly Media's brand new Star Trek podcast where my ever-loyal co-host Mike Hazelton and I will pick one random episode from the Star Trek universe, review it, share our thoughts, and also we have 6 recurring segments that are specific things we're going to pick out from every episode, things that, typically always appear in some form in various Star Trek projects, and we'll be acknowledging those as part of our discussion. We are thrilled to say that the very first episode that Mike and I will be covering is the Star Trek The Next Generation episode Darmok. This was a Season 5, Episode 2, absolutely classic episode that we'll obviously be unpacking this evening. Just some facts and stats, courtesy of Memory Alpha. Shout out, by the way, to anyone listening to this that's never come across Memory Alpha. What an incredible, unbelievably nuanced resource of, Star Trek geeky information. It's so helpful. This was first aired on the 30th of September 1991, the second episode of its 5th season. The show, I think, had very much grown its Riker's beard by this point, I think. Don't you think? TNG was sort of well established at this point by now. Teleplay by Joe Menosky, and the story was written by Philip Lazebnik and also Joe Menosky, directed by Winrich Colby. Winrich Colby, who has been responsible for various 90s Star Trek shows. He directed Star Trek across Next Gen, DS9, and Voyager, and would often be given the big DS9 war episodes, or the arc episodes, ones that would require sort of lots of special effects or lots of combat, etc. So a well seasoned director, much like Jonathan Frakes has now become in the Star Trek universe. So let's just kick off the discussion. Mike, just give me your sort of initial gut reactions. We've obviously seen these shows many times. We're now revisiting TNG and picking out our random episode every time we record our podcast. What was your thoughts on Darmok?
Yeah, I mean, when this came up, I think I accused you of cooking the books. It's just, for me, it's probably in my top 10 Star Trek episodes. It's an iconic one. It's one that people reference quite a lot, and it's obviously been in lower. The aliens have been in lower decks, and it's just has that kind of moral undercurrent that you get with some TNG episodes where Picard is trying to do the right thing and trying to communicate with him, and he obviously meets the captain of the other ship who's very similar and is willing to basically put his life on the line to communicate with an alien species who could be hostile for all they know. So
it's one of Riker's best lines in the episode, is where he says, I want to try and find a way that we can talk our way out of this. And it felt so centered on that sort of very classic Star Trek trope where it's centered on its morality, and it's such a lovely way of unpacking that.
Yeah, and interestingly, you saying that the show has grown its Riker's beard. Riker earlier in TNG was very much of Worf's mindset.
Yes,
I think, where he was super cautious or super aggressive, and he would have just been we can't take any risks, with these people. And by now, he's basically taken on Picard's morals.
Yeah. That again, actually, because I know that so much of this focused on Patrick Stewart's performance, and it really was. We'll get to it, obviously, but some of the stuff he gets to do, that very quiet scene around the fire when he's injured, that he just gives a monologue, a story from classical Earth literature, was just beautifully delivered, and also what a great directing choice that they focused on the captain's responses. They focused on him as the Temerian in the scene, not on Patrick Stewart telling the story, which is brilliant. But Worf ended up being the foil for Riker in this. He was the one sort of pushing the...
as is quite often.
As you'd expect, and he's getting denied.
Worf, just at the most, sometimes at the most inappropriate moments, just arguing. We should attack them.
And always getting shot down, right? It's one of the best things ever. Watching, there was literally a scene, I've been watching season 1 of TNG recently, and there was a scene where he literally just said, recommend we go to Yellow Alert and raise shields, and Picard just turned around and goes, why? It's just the greatest response. He gets that all the time. But Riker, I think, was a real standout in this episode. So much of it was centered on Picard and the Temerian captain. But Riker, actually, the way he so quickly shifts to being right, we need to do this. I'm the leader. I'm making the calls. I'm making the tough decisions. He was written really strongly here in a way that I think often he's not given that kind of interesting material throughout TNG. He doesn't sort of always get those opportunities outside of, like episodes like Frame of Mind, where he completely just, gets to show his hammy, I'm in a psychological thriller acting. But he was written really well in this, I think, to being very matter of fact, to the point, I need you to get this done. And it was nice to see sort of the early seeds of Captain Riker coming out of that.
Yeah, one bit that I found particularly interesting was, so Picard is basically beamed down to the planet against his will, and the transmissions are blocked, and they can scan the planet, but transport off is obviously blocked. And Riker decides to send a shuttle try to send a shuttle down to the planet, which is quite risky, because obviously the other ship could fire on it, and he kind of made the call that they wouldn't fire on it because he thinks they're just whatever it is, they're testing the humans or whatever, and they do get fired on, and it turns out the other ship has actually much better firepower than the Enterprise, even, which is a bit surprising.
Yes, because the power dynamic has always been that the Galaxy class was the one that would often outmatch ships. They would establish themselves as being very powerful.
You wonder if it's one of those situations where it's basically for the purpose of the story, their shields basically get knocked down instantly.
Yes. Yeah.
But,
there was always things like that with Voyager, where like early Voyager season 1 and 2, especially against the Kazon, was very, very powerful. And they'd get to like season 7, a Hirogen torpedo would take out, it'd be like Tuvok could be like shields at 80%, and then the next hit shields are down. They'd be like, the Enterprise can fight the Borg and like hold its own against the Borg cube occasionally, and then it comes against like a race that's had very limited contact with other species, and but yeah, no, I thought that call to send the shuttle was quite interesting, quite a bold first move. Like you were saying, he straight away goes into this kind of captain mode and makes quite a critical call, which doesn't ultimately amount to anything, but they do learn some stuff about the Temerians. I think actually, speaking of like decisions made, it was nice to pair off Data and Troy doing the research on the Temerian language, because they couldn't get anything from the Universal Translator. But we'd seen, what was nice for us as the audience is just structurally, we'd seen Picard figure it out like 2 scenes earlier. He explained like, oh, you speak in metaphor. And we saw that reveal for us as the audience as he discovered it, which I think really played up Picard as a character in terms of his instincts for diplomacy. That really strengthened his role, because it showed him figuring it out first, before Data, before all the resources of the ship had managed to work out that's how they communicated. It was a lovely reveal, that.
It's funny because actually it's Troy that clocks. She heard the computers like listing some of the names that they've heard the Temerians say, and Troy is like, oh, hang on, and Data's like, isn't Data like a computer? Shouldn't Data surely have picked up on that?
How'd you not connect those dots, pal?
But one of my favorite things about the episode is just how the two characters of like you've already said about how it was directed, the two captains, the personalities of them. Although we get obviously very little of the personality of the Temerian captain can really come across, but he gives Picard the fire. So, recognizing that he's cold and stuff. Yeah. Just little elements of that you can really... They're very similar characters. And how they managed to communicate that, the writers and the director, despite having such a limited set of words to work with, it's really
pretty well done. And actually the story choice to not just go down the sort of the classic Kirk versus the Gorn on the planet fight sequence. Like, Picard and the Temerian captain never actually fight once in the episode. And there's that great line from Picard early on where he says, you're going to attack me in my sleep. The assumption, it sets it up beautifully for the audience that they're just going to eventually argue.
Yeah, and he had... Because there's the 2 knives, and I think everyone's first thought is, Picard and the
challenge to a duel.
Just going to fight on the planet, that's what it is. They get beamed down there so no one can interfere, and then they have a fight. But yeah, also the monster on the planet is like a early TNG like monster. It's a weird like energy.
Yeah, it feels like Armus, doesn't it? The big black oil slick. Yeah. It just feels like just something evil is down there, which was that. I suppose it gave them, I think, a nice pressure without making the story about that. I think if they'd pivoted, which I think a lot of early TNGs would have done. They would have pivoted to understanding the creature and what his motivations are. They kept that was just a bit of external pressure. They kept it on their relationship. And again, the way that some of those shots were done where you didn't see the creature at all, those sort of lovely long panning shots around the captain and the Temerian, just with them with the knives up and them looking around, it really helped build that tension in those scenes. It was very effective, really well, very simple in terms of the directing choices made, but it worked really nicely.
The bit where they try to beam Picard off is really, because he's just kind of formed this initial friendship with the captain, and then they get attacked by the monster thing, and then as the Temerian's getting like pummeled, they basically start beaming Picard off, and he can't help.
He screams,
and that was really quite gut wrenching, actually.
Yeah,
that he
no.
can't
There's that
help.
great. There's a long shot, isn't there, where you see Picard like half beaming, and the Temerian falls into shot, like falls in front, and that really hit home. Like the fact that within 20 minutes of the episode, we're caring about that relationship. That really is to the strength of that.
You want them to be buds. You want them to,
I know.
To, like, invite him over to the Enterprise and show him around, and because what happens in the end ultimately is there's a recognition that they can communicate at a really basic level, but then they just go their separate ways. There isn't like a, you come over to our ship as you'd expect them to do with this kind of initial meeting, but and I'm certain if the Temerian captain had survived, that's what would have happened. There would have been it would have gone quite down a different route. I also want to just say the first officer of the Temerian ship was also quite a cool character. Very distinctive looking. I always like, we've got a section on it later, but I always like where they managed to make the aliens look distinctive enough.
Yes, that they have their own identity like humans.
In really heavy makeup. Yeah.
That's actually too worked really nicely, where that there was also that additional pressure on both sides of the story. They maintained obviously the constant threat of the creature, and obviously then him being the Temerian captain being injured, but the back and forth between Riker and the first officer on the view screen, keeping that pressure on the story at all times. It felt uneasy. It felt like it didn't feel comfortable at all, and that's something where TNG often can, they focus then too much perhaps on the technobabble. Or, in the early seasons, was the Crusher solving everything. Whereas actually they had some really nice external pressure from two fronts. And also, really pleasingly, a solid A story. They didn't feel a need to split into an A and a B on this one. The whole episode was about this crisis and what was going on with their relationship.
Yeah, and you kind of, you have the two captains on the planet, the two first officers kind of trying to communicate and trying to work things out, much more hostile almost throughout than it is with the captains, but it's really nice synergy, in that way. I think.
For sure. There was, just going sort of on a slightly more superficial tangent, there was a bit during the fight where Patrick Stewart's uniform Picard's uniform gets sliced in half, and I did wonder if is that a little bit of a Shatner nod? Was that little, that kind of he got hit and it was a rip, and it's or just showing off Patrick Stewart's 80s abs. I don't know whether there was a little something there. Or even my wife looked up and be like, hello.
He's wearing his little jacket for this as well, isn't he?
He's got that cozy looking jacket, and he was giving a briefing at the beginning of the jacket too, because he was beamed off the bridge wearing it, so it was just
lucky.
Good. Because that would have been Chilly Billy if he was down there in his TNG onesie. That's not going to be okay, is it?
No.
I really also, I think it was nice to see them shoot on location, not a soundstage. They obviously shot, I don't know actually where the episode was filmed, but it was shot in a sort of an outdoor location. It wasn't shot on Planet Hell where you see it, being redressed constantly in Star Trek.
Yeah.
It was really nice to get those sort of, and actually it was, when you think about it too, it was fairly limited in terms of locations just generally. It was kind of the bridge engineering the planet with shots of the Temerian ship. It was kept very, very focused, and that builds us up to the ending. When Picard walks on the bridge, immediately just takes back command, and Riker immediately supersedes it. It was their relationship, their dynamic just played so brilliantly without words there. Just they shifted back into their roles, and then Picard delivering the news effectively through their language, through the metaphor, and showing, and I love that shot of him holding up the captain's log, and it's then beamed out of his hand. That whole sequence really paid off their relationship, and it was because it was given room to grow. It was given, we saw Picard's initial fear, to his frustration, to instantly wanting to defend him, to him looking after him on the campsite with the storytelling, to then eventually the captain's death. Again, really poignantly handled, I thought. Just placing the knife on his chest. It was beautifully done.
Yeah. Nice that they didn't just bring him back to life. Because sometimes that happens. Like someone will die on a planet and they'll beam them back to the ship and they'll bring them back to life
somehow
through some ridiculous Star Trek
Beverly's hyperspace. But yeah, so it was really, I think that they stuck to their story choices nicely on this one too. There was consequences to everything that had happened. It gave it weight. And again, I was expecting actually that we wouldn't have gotten that last scene, that great scene with Picard and Riker in the ready room, where Picard's reading off like some Greek mythology, and it ends with him doing that the kind of the Temerian bow, with that shot that we don't see very often, do we? The external shot of his ready room, but from the outside with the starfield in reverse.
Yeah, it's nice.
It was such a lovely coda to that episode. I didn't expect that we would get that little scene, just showing sort of the slight poignancy to it. So now, I think it's fair to say that this episode is definitely a winner. We've had an absolute blast revisiting Darmok, and I think forever it will always be one of TNG's very best, for all of the reasons we've already discussed. And since this is our first episode of Plasma Conduit, we're going to be introducing 6 mini segments, just a little bit of fun to wrap out our first recording. We've got 3 each that we've created that are designed to sort of track recurring bits and tropes that often appear in Star Trek episodes, not just limited to Next Generation, but just across the whole franchise. The first of which, and I figured we could maybe just alternate between each other on this one. The first of which is Riker's Wink, which is a segment I came up with, tracking how many characters are seen flirting, either bridge crew characters with aliens or each other. Just there's often that little sort of twinkle in the eye, Riker with his eyebrow going on. There's always something like that across various Star Trek shows. However, I have to say, go on.
Sometimes Riker and multiple characters in the
sometimes not restricted just to one. He's playing the field. However, big old goose egg, big 0 for this episode. It was so serious. There wasn't an example of flirting to be seen anywhere in this one. So that's a big fat 0 for Riker's Wink on this one for Darmok.
Well, yeah, this is Leffler's first episode, I think, in engineering, and Geordi always has his eye on anyone that he can. But yeah, probably a bit not strong enough for Riker's Wink, but worth
but there's
mentioning
definitely that there's the early idea of him desperately flirting with his staff, definitely coming in there.
If Wesley didn't get there first, I think Geordi would have been.
Wesley obviously gazumped him, but also we haven't had Leah Brahms yet. I don't think by this point by Darmok. I don't think that's happened yet. So that's cooking in the wings. Mike, your first of your segments.
Yeah, my first segment is called Get It Done. So it's basically regular Star Trek trope where someone normally in engineering is asked to do something or how long it will take, and they say whatever 10 hours, and then the captain usually comes back and says I need it now, or I need it half the time, and then they usually protest slightly, and then it's like I'll do it. And there's a couple in this one. So there's trying to beam through the interference initially was quite a high priority. So Riker was getting Geordi to sort that out. It was going to take too long, so Geordi made sure it happened in much quicker. And then there was another one where I think Riker asked how many phaser shots it would take to take out like the interference, whatever it is, generator on the enemy ship. And they were saying 2 shots, and then he said, I need it in 1, and then they were like, yeah, okay.
If we do this, and this, and prep it for the next 4 hours, then we'll be fine.
When it's like, why didn't you just suggest that in the first place?
Yeah. Why did you go for the one that was less work for you, Geordi? Come on now. You and Worf just couldn't be asked to work together. Now, you mentioned interference a couple of times there. That's actually my second segment. How often does interference of some kind cause an issue with communications, with beaming, with getting information? Now, you referenced it, obviously. They never actually once used the word interference in this episode. it's referred to
really?
as a scattering field that the Temerians are using that prevents exactly what they need to do, which is either beaming him up or to get an accurate sort of either communication signal down to the planet. But they never actually use the word interference once. So I am still going to put a mention in there that, the scattering field, Data did a very long explanation about that. But interestingly, that word, which comes up all the time in Star Trek, never actually appeared in this episode.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So my second one is Red Barkley, it's called, which is for any like baffling crew decisions or like incompetence by the crew, or where you consider this is like the pinnacle of Starfleet, where they're suggesting stupid ideas or yeah. And I think that there's a couple in this. So, well, we've already mentioned that Troy kind of highlights the pattern in the or a possible pattern in the language before Data. Data also, like, one of the first things he says about it is like, oh, they appear to be like proper names and places, and it's like, yes, Data, like
that's evidenced by this.
It's clear, like, anyone could have told you that. The other one is when they first beam Picard off. Like, Picard is gone. It's like 2 seconds after he's gone off the bridge. He's not there anymore. His matter has disappeared. And then Riker's like, "Stop that beam out!" It's like, what? What do you want me to do?
If it's taking that long, he's not coming back. Like, that's done. So that's hilarious.
That's just not really. You can see, like, in the heat of the moment, maybe it would be explainable, but it's just quite funny that the first officer of the Enterprise, would think you could retrieve someone that's already been
definitely finished the transport
on the
sequence.
planet.
Yeah, absolutely. So my one is a fairly superficial one, but it's one I love actually in any media. Characters, it's called the nod tracker. Characters that give each other that kind of very acting kind of nod moment. For audio listeners, by the way, I pantomimed that for everyone watching. And there was only really one that appeared in this episode. There was a lovely moment between Riker and Worf when Riker had just given an order. They're on the bridge. Worf had sort of said, I concur, or I agree, or said he was supporting him. And they just gave each other just a little subtle kind of, just there you go. And that was a really nice little non-verbal moment. Their relationship in this, not the sort of Riker taking jabs at him. They were pitching their ideas. It was crisis time. You could see that their relationship was very professional in that moment. It was lovely to see their interplay, and that was a nice little moment of acknowledgement with them together. They were clearly very comfortable with each other, which was great.
I don't think there was a nod, but there was a bit between Riker and maybe it was actually Picard and the first officer of the Temerian ship at the end, where they go their separate ways, but there's like an understanding between them, or like a respect,
an acknowledgement,
them,
wasn't it, between them?
Nice. Also, not on the nod tracker, but when Worf is going down to the planet in the shuttlecraft, and then Riker's like, "You need to come back." Worf has like 5 solid seconds of
that's right
rage
of palpable irritation, right? Where he's just, and then he accepts the order, doesn't he? Which is great. I don't know whether that's like a quirk of the editing, because like they obviously would have had the voiceover of Riker being read by like one of the crew to give him the timing.
I like it because it
Worf
works.
has
that about, obviously it has that about him being a Klingon. It's it's good.
It's good.
So my final one is pathetic prosthetics, which definitely not pathetic in this episode, but it's kind of, we'll be reviewing any alien makeup and things that they have in the episode, and it was really good. We've already mentioned how they do a good job of making them look unique, and just it was excellent all round in this one, and they're a really cool alien species that we get introduced to.
I really like the Temerian uniforms too, with all of their various things that the captain takes off to pray.
Around the campfire. I was going to say earlier, getting that detail, and like you said, with Picard doing the thing at the end, that they don't have to give us that kind of cultural context to the species, but I think it's really nice that we, from this episode, we know probably some of their like holy symbols and things. We know some historical stories that are really important.
Yeah, they're fiction too, which is interesting.
And it's more than we know about some quite mainstream Star Trek species, probably.
They don't, I think, get, cool. DS9 does a great job of expanding the lore of the Klingons, and then obviously we get a huge focus on the Cardassians, which in TNG, they're just kind of the bad guys. The Ferengi as well, DS9, I think, given its single location, it afforded itself the opportunity to really dig in and explore those races in a way that TNG often didn't. But this single episode, this one appearance of the Temerians, we really got a great exploration of their culture and what makes them unique. So definitely, really, really cool there. So that will wrap it up now for our very first episode of Plasma Conduit. And what will now be a tradition for our podcast is we are going to live choose in the recording right now our next episode. I'm going to use Microsoft's Copilot, their AI, to select an episode for us, and I'm going to do it right here. This will
not going to beat this one, is it?
It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. We've decided that anything from the Star Trek universe is fair game, so I have the prompt already ready to go. So I'm now going to just send that.
We have some vetoes, don't we?
We have some vetoes. We can say if it's maybe halfway through an arc, we'd probably say we'd watch then instead the first part to kind of establish that. Okay, so our second episode is going to be from Star Trek Enterprise, Season 3, Episode 8, the episode Twilight. This is an alternate history, like an alternate future episode, where it's in the middle of the Xindi conflict, and it shows what happens to Archer and the crew if the Xindi succeed. Earth is destroyed.
Oh, amazing.
And I remember this one really clearly. We watched it recently with my stepdaughter. It's a very good Archer and T'Pol relationship kind of episode. Lots of action, lots of emotion in that one. So that hopefully will be an interesting one to unpack. And just off the top of my head, looking at our segments, there's definitely going to be some mentions of our 6 segments in there for sure. Thank you everyone so much for tuning into this first episode of Plasma Conduit. You can find Burly Bird Media on all of the various social platforms at Burly Bird Media. We're also on our Discord. We're going to have a Plasma Conduit channel in the Discord now, where we can be, throwing in your Star Trek chat, your thoughts, your feelings about the episode, about the discussion we've had tonight, but also just sharing your favourite moments from the franchise and perhaps even voting on things you'd like us to cover in the future. Mike, where can people find you?
I'm on Blue Sky at the Xbox Guide and Threads at the Xbox Guide and the xboxguide.com for Xbox news and articles and things like that.
Thank you again, folks. We will see you next time.
See ya.